So this is my newest article on the Foundation for Economic Education's website, How Universal Basic Income Could Be Used to Suppress Free Speech. Such a system could not possibly remain universal. Because I see people, I'm trying to change the UBI debate. Because when I see people talk about UBI, for the most part, they either don't care about the numbers, they're one of those people that are just like, they just assume it works, same thing with the Green New Deal. Like, people just kind of assume it works, and anyone that disagrees must hate the system. And then there are people that are like, no, the system cannot work. Like, even if you wanted it to work, it cannot. And while that's a good argument to make, while that's a good debate to have, I don't think, it's not very convincing, because people aren't convinced by numbers. People tend not to be convinced by the numbers. They're just like, hey, it's something that, even if someone tells them, no, the numbers can't work, as soon as one economist says, well, we could possibly make it work, that's what they rely on. So I want to try to take this from a different angle about why I'm opposed to UPI, because I'm opposed to pretty much giving government any sort of major power like this, because they're going to abuse it. And that's what I went through here on how, basically, this might sound like fear-mongering, but I don't think it is, when we can look back through and say, well, this isn't something that might happen, this is something that most likely will happen. So the idea of UBI, remember, if you don't know what UBI is, it's essentially just giving the government power to, it's a replacement for the welfare state, or at least something to work alongside the welfare state, where people give, or the government will give you just this set amount of cash. For Andrew Yang, it was $1,000 a month. They'll give you the set amount of cash to spend on whatever you want, and the idea is, at the very least, that is the ideal safety net. Instead of all this corrupt bureaucracy, which, corrupt bureaucracy is bad, our current welfare state's terrible, and an alternative would be good. The issue is, I see people, they just say, here's this file system, it's very simple, and it'll be great. But what people don't keep in mind is, most of these systems we have, they didn't start out complicated. They started out rather simple, and then over time, they got bloated and just became corrupt over time and were abused. And as we see, governments rarely, they don't take over a certain part of they don't take more power, or they don't enforce a new program with the goal of using it to manipulate people. Usually they enforce it with the best of intentions, and then over time they take it over. So the basic part of this, I'll just quote the part here. The basic part of universal basic income might be true as it's first implemented, but it is unlikely to remain that way. That is my point, that over time it's going to be bloated. It's going to become, it's not going to be basic anymore. People are going to keep adding and subtracting and manipulating and moving it to where 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, let's say if it were to be implemented now, it's not going to be basic. And I don't think it'll be universal as well. And that's why we'll go through. So let's assume for a moment that UBI is economically feasible and would work as its defenders claim. Would there be any reason to oppose its implementation? That's the thing. Let's say it works. Then what? UBI is a government program, and like most government programs, it is subject to manipulation and molding by politicians with various agendas as time passes. Our current welfare system wasn't this bloated and inefficient from the start. Over time, it was expanded and distorted to become what it is today. And that's essentially what I just said. So, on the unrealistic proposal part, some of these changes will be altruistic. Congress may modify small parts of the system to correct for unforeseen errors. Because, there's always the breaking in period where they change things to kind of oh, we didn't account for that. Oh, we didn't think about that. We didn't realize that. So they make changes just a little bit of tweaks. Nothing wrong with that. Just a few tweaks to apply it. Based on trends that show an increasing political divide, we should be concerned about what either side might do to UBI when they are in power. Now, personally, I'm more concerned about what the left will do, but at the same time, remember that there are all these people that think Trump is a fascist and that we are the far right is on the rise. And it's if you believe that, if that's the case, then you don't want to give them the power of UBI. So therefore, we should be skeptical of the universal parts of universal basic income. Andrew Yang's UBI policy would provide $1,000 per month to every citizen over the age of 18. Each person would then be free to spend that money on whatever they want, as long as it's legal. Now that is, again, I'm not just talking about Andrew Yang's policy. That's just the one that's in the news. I'm talking about UBI in general. So, it could be, who knows, the little specifics. I don't think that really matters. I think the system of UBI, this is a problem that I haven't seen anyone bring up. Maybe it's because it's a dumb argument, but it seems to me it seems to be a pretty good argument. And I haven't really seen anyone refute it yet. So we'll see what happens, because this article is only a few hours old at the time that I'm recording this. Such a system could not possibly remain universal. $1,000 per month is quite a bit of money. Since that money can be used for just about anything, it will not be long before political activists begin pointing to examples of extremists on either side of the political spectrum using their UBI money to further their extremist ideology. White supremacists will be using their income to spread their beliefs, and so will violent leftist organizations like Antifa. So I'm concerned more with the right, or with the right, the actual legitimate far right being using it for stuff, and the far left then going after them. I think the far left will be the ones in power in the future. So that's who I'm mostly concerned about. But of course, I'm writing this for a general audience where who knows what you might fear. So I think who knows what'll happen? Who knows if it'll be actual white supremacists? Like there are some actual like neo-Nazi organizations out there. As small as they are, all you need, I think, is a few examples of them using UBI to say like, hey, like I'm using UBI to further my far right ideology. And let's say, for example, that they're not actually far, like they don't even have to be white supremacists. They just have to be like, you could say white nationalists, or even they could be just like the Ben Shapiro types, the people that keep being like, just today, The Economist called Ben Shapiro alt-right. And it's like, you don't know what that means. Like, that is bad journalism right there. Anyone that knows anything about anything knows that that statement in itself is incorrect. And it's like, that right there is bad journalism. So all you need is, even then, like, let's say people are furthering, like, Ben Shapiro's show with UBI. Like, that's all you need. You don't even need someone that is legitimately alt-right or far-right. All you need is someone that is being painted that way. And people are going to say, oh my God, look at these far-right people using UBI to promote their violent beliefs. The government is directly funding these far-right organizations. We need to stop that. And if you think that's radical, just think like, who knows? You might have there will be legitimate terrorists out there probably using UBI. And as soon as there's the next terrorist attack, people might wonder, like, what if the next terrorist uses UBI to buy some guns or to buy like a weapon or whatever? Like, who knows what can happen? All we know is that like that's eventually going to happen, and there will be calls for people to say, okay, the universal part's great, but what if we cut out these people? Like, what if we cut out the most far right people? And like, I just think that's inevitable. It's going to happen. And you know what's going to happen once they say, okay, we're going to exclude it from the far right. But now they might say you can't donate UBI to, let's say, political organizations. But again, like, what's a political organization? Like, how is a bunch of people getting together to promote their own beliefs? Is that a political organization if it's not officially registered that way? Like, it's going to be, I think it's just going to expand. Like, that exception to the universal part is just going to keep expanding. And eventually you're going to see people where it's like, oh, well, the Proud Boys, you can't donate to the Proud Boys. Or if you're part of the Proud Boys, you can't get UBI. And then they'll say, like, whoa, like, if you've worked for the Daily Wire in the past, I don't know, if you worked for Dennis Prager in the past, I think they'll just keep expanding that term. Well, they'll say, well, if you were tied to here and here, like, think of the Alternative Influence Network. It's like, oh, you have like if you knew this person, and you met this person once. It's like, oh, you wrote for Breitbart once. Well, Breitbart called itself like the home of the alt-right or something, a news outlet of the alt-right. A few years ago it called itself that. Well, now we have to accept people in that camp. I think it's just going to keep growing. I think that exception will keep growing until eventually it's like, hey, like, do you have beliefs that are outside the norm? You can't get your UBI. It's like, well, then journalists will be like, well, if I call that guy alt-right, he might lose his UBI. I think that might be what's going to happen. I'm not saying that's definitely what's going to happen. I'm saying we can't dismiss that because it's not something like there's a 5% chance of it happening. I think it's like a 60-70% chance of that happening. That's why I don't consider it fear-mongering, because it's not like I took something that might maybe possibly happen. I'm quite confident that this will happen if implemented. And I'm not talking about, right away. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30 years down the line, because we don't know what's going to happen. All you need is for an actual socialist or an actual intersection. Like, all you need is someone like AOC to become president of the United States, and that's when you start having issues like that. And then again, like the same thing applies on the opposite side of this political spectrum. If you're someone that thinks Trump is a legitimate fascist, you don't want to give him the power of UPI. If you think someone worse than Trump will come, if you think the alt-right and the far, like white supremacy is on the rise, and they have the chance of becoming, of influencing politics, you don't want those people, and you fear those people being in power. You don't want to give them the power of UBI. But yeah, political discourse will be skewed in one direction. One side will be afraid to speak, and the other side will talk freely. Money talks. Money has influence. And as soon as that becomes a threat, it's the same thing with like losing your job. People are afraid to speak out because someone might call their employer and get them fired. This is the same thing. If they're willing to do that, why wouldn't they be willing to do this? It is already common practice for mobs of activists to contact an alleged extremist employer and demand he be fired. This will be no different. Activists will say, should the U.S. government really be funding neo-Nazis? With enough public pressure, UBI will be modified to exclude extremists. So far, this may not seem so bad, but the next step should be obvious. Once it's established that extremists cannot receive UBI, that group will continuously expand. The term far right has already been misapplied numerous times by biased media outlets. Numerous conservatives, classical liberals, and centrists have been labeled far right several times. Now, this links to my 2 articles. That first one there, Misconceptions of the Far Right. This one is More Misconceptions of the Far Right. I wrote an article that did rather successfully called Misconceptions of the Far Right, and it's a weekly column, so the very next week I was like, what do I read about? Well, in that past week, since I wrote that, there was 5 examples of people that are not even remotely being called far right, or not even remotely being tied to the far right. Articles were put to try to slander them in that direction. So I wrote a sequel. I wrote a full article just on the past week of people being mislabeled as far right. So we know this is going to happen because it's already happening. If speaking out and expressing your beliefs could cost you $1,000 each month, that's a pretty big incentive to keep quiet. If that's the case, this means political discourse will be skewed in one direction. That was part of the quote from earlier. This isn't too different from what we've seen on college campuses. Now, I quoted something from Heterodox Academy, that's Jonathan Haidt's website, or at least he's part of it. I just read The Coddling of the American Mind, and it's they go through all this crazy college campus stuff, where you don't need a majority. You just need 4 really loud people, and everyone else needs to be afraid to speak up. Corruption will take over. The world is already far too familiar with this process. A new government program is established with the best of intentions. At some point, a more corrupt administration will gain control and abuse the system already in place. So, am I going to go back a century? Am I going back a few centuries? Or am I going back to the Soviet Union? No, I'm talking about something that's just recently happened in Venezuela. Because the nice thing about Venezuela is we can say it's happening now. And we can look at what's happening right now. This isn't stuff that we've overcome. This is stuff that is still happening. We only need to look at Maduro's recent manipulation of the Venezuelan healthcare system. According to Cuban doctors on medical missions to Venezuela, so apparently Cuba sends doctors down to Venezuela because Venezuela's healthcare system is atrocious. This is a single-payer system. It's not something Maduro put in place. The single-payer system was put in place forever ago, and we can see how people that advocate for single-payer, they're I think they're wrong, but they're not oh, I'm going to manipulate this. No, they think it's a nice thing to do, but then it's going to be abused in the future. Maduro's regime ordered Cuban doctors to warn citizens that they would be refused care if they didn't vote for him. The doctors also claimed that oxygen supplies were used as a political weapon to gain votes. Yeah, they had a bunch of oxygen supplies, a bunch of just tanks of oxygen to use on people that were having trouble breathing, and it was and Maduro's regime essentially said, don't give it to him now, wait until closer to the election. So it's absolutely atrocious. We know what's going to happen. You don't want to give, if you think the government will essentially become, if you think the government's already corrupt, but if you think it's going to become a dictatorship, if you have any kind of confidence that it'll be a dictatorship in the next century, you don't want to give people this kind of power. Granted, we already have a welfare system, and there hasn't been any major attempts at removing welfare for extremists, so why would it be any different from a UBI? And I think that's the biggest rebuttal to my point is, you're just fear-mongering because it hasn't happened yet. We have a welfare system and that hasn't happened yet. But my rebuttal to that would then be, unlike these other programs, the simplicity of UBI is what makes it so susceptible to the scenario described above. So food stamps is one. Nobody's going to say, no food stamps for Nazis. It just seems the fact is the welfare state we have today, as inefficient and bloated as it is, the general concept is this money is given to people that need it. People that need food stamps. The idea is if you're getting food stamps, you need it. And you wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. Now, how close to that is with reality, that's a whole different story. But the point is that's how it's generally perceived. Same thing with Medicare. It's you're not going to say no Medicare for Nazis because just even though they're Nazi, even though you can call them Nazis, taking away people's health care is not a good campaign strategy. It just doesn't work. Taking away people's food, that does not work. Even if you paint them as far right and alt right and whatever, it's just not going to work because the idea of taking away food and stuff like that is it's not a good argument. It doesn't look like a good campaign. But UBI can be spent on anything. UBI is a decent bit of money and you can spend that on whatever you want. Even if you don't, you might need it, but you also might not need it. That's the thing. It's much easier to be when you look at food stamps or Social Security or Medicare, it's assumed that you need it. Whereas UBI, you can easily make someone can easily think in their minds, well, they probably don't need it. They probably if they're spending it on they're probably spending it on far right stuff and not food or whatever. it's much easier to just take a simple sum of money that everyone's getting and assume that they'll be fine without it. Like, to not even think about that stuff, to dismiss it. They'll just think it's much easier to just take that, to give them the benefit of the doubt in the sense of, oh, we're not taking away their we're not going to make them starve to death or whatever. We're just going to take it from them because it could be spent on neo-Nazi stuff. That's what they're going to do. All of this, as stated earlier, relies on the assumption that the economics behind UBI are solid and will function as its advocates describe. Even if the system functions, we must worry about the power it has to suppress freedom of speech. That is it. Like, that's pretty much it here. And there's some other articles in the comments, or listed in the bottom. I'm going to leave a link to this article in the description. If you haven't already, click on it and follow along. I encourage you to read it and share it if you think it's a good argument, or share this video even. But I kind of like to go through and just like try to popularize the stuff I write and maybe explain some parts that people misunderstanding, but just trying to get the stuff out there, because I think this is a decent argument. This is something we should be worrying about. And it's like, if you think this is just fear, if you think this is wrong, provide me an argument in the comment section. Provide me a rebuttal to this. If you believe it. And even then, like, if you've written something, if you're going to write an article on that goes through a full rebuttal, link it in the description. Links will automatically be picking up by the spam filter and blocked, but I will try to remember to go through and to approve them later. And I gotta say, like, I'm waiting for people. I'm surprised nobody's accused me yet of deleting comments, because I gotta tell you, Facebook's I tend not to believe it when people say they are deleting, like, some channels deleting comments, because even though they might be doing that, Facebook's comment filter is absolutely horrible, and you can't turn it off. And it's just like, I don't even know how it measures things. I know links, I think, is an automatic ban, but every so often, like once a week, I'll go through the spam filter, and it'll be like, oh, like, all of these articles, some of them are by people like I know these subscribers. They're not like bots, they're not spam or anything, and I'll just go through and just one by one and approve all of them. But yeah, just so you're aware, I don't even know what happens if you post a comment and it gets picked up by the spam filter. I don't even know if they tell you that. Like, if you're told, maybe that's happened with my comments. I don't know. I've never actually gone back and checked if any of my comments on anything has been picked up by the spam filter. But yeah, just so you're aware of that. Like, if you ever accuse me of deleting comments, I never delete comments. They get picked up by the spam filter. I have gone through the spam filter and been like, huh, that person just pretty much insulted me and called me names, and this person is mad for no reason and provided no art. It's nothing but an insult, and I'll approve it anyway, because it's like, why not? At least, like, I don't see any reason to delete comments. Even if it's a horrible comment that attacks me, that helps me. Like, if someone leaves a comment saying you're stupid, that helps me, because it helps the algorithm. Like, the YouTube algorithm sees the video as something worth promoting. This is completely unrelated to my article, so I went off on a bit of a tangent. But like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. Again, I'll leave this article in the description. Go check out Foundation for Economic Education. I think they're a good organization. They've been around since like the 1930s, 1940s. And they got loads of good stuff. And their threshold for what they publish, I think, is pretty high. So I appreciate it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more. The subscription helps a lot. And thanks for watching.